So I'm Jamie Beachy. I'll be moderating the panel for today. It's wonderful to be with you. I have a PhD in religious studies and have focused mostly on professional spiritual caregiving in my career. I'm also a MAPS MDMA assisted therapy training consultant and therapist on the phase 3 studies and chair of the board of directors for the Childrena Institute. So I'm happy to be here with you today, and I'll introduce our speakers and then we'll get to the questions. Emily Sinclair, who you've already met this morning if you've been here through the morning, has a PhD. She's a PhD candidate at Durham University in social anthropology in the UK. Her research is based in Iquitos, Peru, and focuses on the globalization of ayahuasca, including the contemporary revival of shamanic practice, gender, witchcraft, hope we hear about some witchcraft today, and healing potentials of sacred plants for the body and soul. For over 2 years, Emily lived and worked with a local healer and his family and assisted them in managing their ayahuasca healing center. She has also worked at other centers as a facilitator in Peru. She's a member of Childrena's Ayahuasca Community Committee and is involved with Childrena's initiative on raising awareness around sexual abuse. And she lives in the UK with her daughter, Ava. We have Rebecca Kronman, LCSW. She's a licensed therapist, mother of 2 boys, age 7 and 9, and founder of Plant Parenthood, a community exploring the intersection of psychedelics and family. She's a psychotherapist in private practice on Lenape territory in Brooklyn, New York, where she offers ketamine-assisted psychotherapy and works with clients to prepare for and integrate psychedelic experiences. She's a trainer at Fluence, and she serves on the Clinical Council of Journey Clinical and the board of the Psychedelic Medicine Association. And last but not least here, Glauber, Loures de Assis, is Associate Director of Childrena Latino America in Brazil. He has a PhD in sociology and is Research Associate at the Interdisciplinary Group for Psychoactive Studies in Brazil. His main interests are the ayahuasca religions, new religious movements, and internationalization of Brazilian religions, including drug use in contemporary society and psychedelic parenthood. He's the author of numerous articles and books, and he's a practitioner with 15 years of experience. He's also the co-founder of Jornadas de Cura, a plant medicine center in Brazil, and he is the father of 3 children, and he lives with his wife, Jacqueline, in Santa Luzia in Brazil. Welcome, everyone. A beautiful panel. There's a few affiliations I forgot. I'm a field scholar with the Emory Center for Psychedelics and Spirituality. But most importantly, perhaps, is I'm the mother of a 22-year-old young woman who might come into the conversation. We'll see. She's certainly present here with me today. All right, so let's start with some questions for each of you. Let's start with Emily. Emily, how did your experience with plant medicines influence your pregnancy and experience of having a child and just your experience of being a mother? How has motherhood impacted this relationship with psychedelics or how you relate to the community?
Well, my daughter, Ava, who's 3, I consider kind of a medicine baby. I met her father in Iquitos, where we were both working with ayahuasca. He was an ayahuasquero, and we fell in love in that space, really. And Ava was conceived between a tobacco purge that we both did and a tobacco diet. I wouldn't have drunk that much tobacco had I known I was pregnant. But I do feel actually it stood her in good stead. I have a close connection with tobacco myself. And of course, as many of you know, it's a very protective, grounding spirit. I also drank ayahuasca 3 times during my pregnancy, as my teacher and his family practiced. That's not all mestizos, but the mestizos I worked with did that, believing that it makes the baby strong, as I believed myself and felt, and those experiences were really beautiful. So during my pregnancy and after actually was quite a difficult time. I won't go into the details of that, but I really feel that it was difficult with Ava's father, and I really feel that her tobacco initiation, if you like, and those experiences with ayahuasca really helped us and really helped her to stay strong in that time. I also drank ayahuasca 3 times with her present, just sleeping next to me in the first year of her life. And then I moved back to England and stopped working with psychedelic plant medicine so much, but it certainly influenced how I've entered into motherhood, which has itself been an incredible healing journey, as I'm sure other mothers can relate to. Ayahuasca has helped me to relate to my daughter as a spiritual being in a human body, as it taught me that I was, and we all are. And I feel that's really quite different than the usual Western materials perspective. And I think that usual perspective often means that we treat children as though they're our possessions, as though they come as a blank slate, and we have to have authority over them and teach them everything they need to know. When we relate to them in this more spiritual way, we understand that they're also our teachers, and they're also on their own journey. So it really helped me to have, I think, a much more healthy perspective of my child and of motherhood in general. And becoming a mother, whilst I haven't used psychedelics very much at all in the past 2 years, becoming a mother gave me the strength that I needed and the inspiration to actually do my own healing. I'd begun that, of course. I'd been working with ayahuasca for 8 years by that point, maybe a little more. But having Ava, gave me the impetus, the inspiration, like I say, to really look at my own stuff and really start to heal it. Because, of course, I wanted to break generational cycles. I didn't want her to carry, and I don't want her to carry those forward. And I think that's happening on a large scale at the moment, which is absolutely wonderful. And the psychedelic community has a lot to do with that movement at the moment, and should have more. I'd love to see more conversation between, conscious parenting communities, if you like, and the psychedelic community, because I think there's a lot of intersection there and dialogue to be had. And the last thing I'll say on this is, as it's not talked about so much, and for me was an enlightening, profound kind of discovery in motherhood, was is breastfeeding, and how it's actually, I've experienced it, as I'm sure many people here have, as a really spiritual experience. We often talk about the physical benefits of breastfeeding for the child, but the spiritual aspect seems to get left out of that conversation. So whilst I wasn't working with psychedelics, I felt that when I fed Ava, it was almost like taking medicine. I'd have wonderful moments of clarity. As I say, I was doing quite a bit of work on myself and healing on myself, and nursing Ava was a huge part of that journey. So I think I'll leave it there for now.
Beautiful, thank you. So psychedelic use is growing exponentially, as we know, and countless psychedelic practitioners are mothers, fathers, grandparents, aunties, and uncles to children. brothers and sisters. And we know that psychedelics are supporting these adults to be more present to their children and their families. So I'll offer this next question to Glauber. How is the relationship between psychedelics and parenting for you, the children in your life, on a personal and on a community level? What would you like for us to know? And I think this way is the most effective with the microphone.
Okay. I would like to acknowledge my children. I'm missing them already because I came here just for this conference. Gael, 6-year-old now, Guaraci, 3 years old, and Yara, 1-year-old girl. And also want to say that's a huge honor to share this space with these incredible women here, Emily, Rebecca, Jamie. And usually at these conferences, I tell the story of the birth of my daughter. She was born in transit in a car, and how ayahuasca helped us to turn this delicate moment into one of the most beautiful and meaningful moments of my life. But today I'm going to tell a story that was even more challenging because I live in Brazil and I came here for this conference. And this trip is a little bit triggering for me because last time I was here in October last year, I stayed for 2 weeks. I had a great experience. Everything was amazing until the day I was returning home. When I arrived at the airport here in San Francisco, I got a call from my wife, and she told me that our eldest boy, he wasn't feeling well and was going to the hospital. So I made a video call, and when I saw him, I realized he was unconscious. It was a long journey, more than 24 hours trip to Brazil, and I was with a Wi-Fi, and I received news that the situation was getting worse and worse and worse, until they sent me a message saying that he was under intensive care, and I despaired, and it was one of the most terrible moments that I lived, because being away from him, on a plane, not knowing what was happening and not being able to help. And then I arrived in Brazil. I went to the hospital. He was intubated, sedated. I was devastated. But then I received wonderful support. My wife, who is, of course, much stronger than I am, and my community, the Santo Daime community, ayahuasca community, they started praying, organizing ceremonies every single day and every single night. So I regained my strength and my confidence. And this is confidential, but I took some rapé snuff and some ayahuasca to the hospital with me. And I was with my child, I was with Gael. But when at rest times, I went out and I just took a very symbolic dose of ayahuasca and rapé. And this helped me a lot. This helped me to connect with my culture, to connect with my family, to connect with my son. And after a few days, we discovered that he had MOGAD, which is a very serious and very rare disease that affects the brain. And after 23 days at the hospital, he was finally released. He's now 100% recovered. Yoo-hoo! And my son's journey has made my ayahuasca community more united and more loving than ever. So in the moments that when I held my son's hands while singing ayahuasca songs, will be with me forever as one of the most incredible and memorable moments of my life. And my point here is, to conclude, psychedelics are not just substances and molecules. They are allies. They are friends. They are teachers, right? And they are also an opportunity to see our lives from different perspectives and to create meaning for our actions and meaning for the events that happen in our lives. So they are a way of building communities, to do things differently, to do things in a better way, to think differently also. And in addition to the evidence from biomedical research on the benefits of psychedelics on the brain, for example, which are very important, there's also evidence from the social sciences and from the traditions on the potential of psychedelics on our individual and collective subjectivity and our ability to give new meaning to our relationships. So psychedelics, amigos, amigas, are also culture.
So in the Western psychedelic mainstream, you know, there's whatever we want to call it, the global north, the West. There's difficulties in including children, adolescents, psychedelic families, and there's a perceived sense of risk. So I have a question for you, Rebecca, and your experience. As psychedelics inevitably expand into society through both medicalized, you know, through ceremonial medicalized underground contexts, what are some of the hidden pitfalls we need to consider, and maybe what are some of the exaggerated risks? Share some of your perspectives with us, and including your, you know, parenting of 2 young boys.
Yes, thank you, Jamie. And I'm going to follow both of your leads and shout out my own kids. Jace is 7, and Shane turned 10 since that bio was written, so I don't want to make that mistake. So some of the hidden pitfalls that are on my mind as psychedelics expand are that a lot of the expansion is going to take place in a very highly individualized Western medical context. And what that means is that if children are, you know, treated as patients, a lot of the time they will be sort of flagged as the indicated patient in a system of the family that is sick, and in a larger societal context that is sick. And so medicating a child when the system is unwell without addressing those systemic issues is a problem. So I am really inspired by some of the work of Adele Lafrance, who is looking at treating the whole family system. I'm really intrigued by the ideas that I've been inspired by my colleague Melissa Whippo, who thinks about what is the family system of support that exists at home. You know, what is the child walking back into? Even if the child is the one who has experienced the trauma, their family still needs to know how to support them. It's not just the medicine that's going to be the support system, it's going to be all the wraparound things as well. Another thing that's on my mind is developing support systems for children who have gone through a more medicalized or ceremonial psychedelic experience. We, as grown-ups in this space, we've gotten to experience, especially in the last few years, this incredible blossoming of niche psychedelic communities. There are communities that support BIPOC individuals, that support LGBTQ individuals, individuals with various disabilities or degrees of ability. And children are going to need to be able to process these experiences as well. To have to contain those experiences, as many of us know, without being able to share that in supportive community is a problem. And we don't have a structure around that as yet, once these medicines potentially roll out to younger patients. Another pitfall that is on my mind is that education around psychedelics has not kept pace with access. We have an educational system in the schools, in the public school system, that essentially went from, as my colleague Rana Hashemi, who runs an organization called No Drugs, KNOW, she talks about the movement from just say no to just say nothing. There is a dearth of fact-based education in the school system for our children to access. And there's also just a complete lack of social emotional learning around what creates a good emotional container for using psychedelics. And to be honest, I have very little faith in the school system to adopt those types of educational structures as the psychedelic movement expands. So I think it's going to be up to us, the psychedelic community, to create those more supportive educational infrastructure. I am definitely concerned about overprescribing, especially if psychedelics, end up sort of going the same route as some of the psychotropic medications, which in the past few years have really exploded in terms of children getting prescribed numerous psychiatric medications. And so, being concerned about that potentially happening with psychedelics as well. And then another thing that I just want to name is some concern about disclosure. So it is, I want to just acknowledge the privilege that I possess in a white body to be able to talk about these issues without being concerned that my body is being disproportionately monitored or policed in the systems that I exist in. And I want to say that, it's not safe for everybody to disclose their psychedelic experiences, especially, children who are members of marginalized communities.
Thank you. Okay, now we'll move to some collective questions here so you can decide if you feel moved to respond here. So how can psychedelic spaces, like the Chacruna annual conference, for example, if we take this space, and also including ceremonial contexts and other gatherings, community gatherings, better accommodate psychedelic parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles, those who care for the children in their lives. Is it really necessary to include children? This is kind of a planted question that we already know the answer to, and if so, what are the benefits of including children in our communities? It's kind of a silly question, but I'm curious to hear your answers. I noticed that I think there was one baby here. I'm not sure if she's still here, but yeah, there's not many children here in our presence.
I'll start. To speak on the conferences, so personally, this is the longest I'll have ever been away from Ava. I'm here for 7 days in total, which is really hard. I think easier for her. She seems to be having a very nice time having a holiday at Grandma's, so all good. I really love the idea, it may be a bit far-fetched, but of having childcare available, a creche kind of set up. Thank you. So that, we can be involved as parents and our children also experience being part of this community and in these spaces. And following on from what you were saying, I think having educational spaces, especially for children at psychedelic conferences and adolescents, would be a really amazing addition. And, as you say, I also don't have much faith in that happening in schools too soon, but we could begin that and move towards being able to offer better education on drugs and substances in schools also, which clearly is needed.
Yeah, I think that including children is a counter-colonial act, actually, because this forces us to expand our minds and helps us to make invisible people visible. So in the patriarchal world we live in, women who are mothers are constantly overwhelmed with childcare. And if the psychedelic field doesn't include mothers and caregivers, it's not only about children. if psychedelic field doesn't include mothers and caregivers, it makes very difficult for them to participate in these places. And can even imagine how big effort is for all of you to be here. And often keeps them away from psychedelics, privileging, as always, white men. So it's not only about children, again, and when we think about how to accommodate children, this is to include children, it's also important to acknowledge that BIPOC children, children with disabilities, and queer children also exist. And different formats for building families are also possible. So including children is also a way of thinking about the inclusion of everyone and the creation of beautiful diversity in the field of psychedelics. So by bringing the subject up, I think we are already starting here to make a difference. Creating spaces like this is already making a difference. And as we know, children are not just children. Children are also the future, and no one is born racist, homophobic, or prohibitionist. So educating children in a psychedelic community is also a chance to build a better, more inclusive psychedelic renaissance. And as Emily said, there is a lack of educational and scientific material about psychedelics for children and young people. This can also be good for a good form of public education. So can we just imagine for a second a world where children are educated to respect and to interact with plants, to other than humans beings? This will be only possible if we take children seriously from now.
Yeah. Thanks. When I saw you wrote this question, Emily, this thought popped into my mind like, oh, what if we had like a cozy, cool ketamine corner for kids at these conferences? Some plush toys. Not that they take it, but, you know, sponsored by ketamine, right? So I also want to shout out the parents in the audience who brought their kids. I saw a little one yesterday, and the parents who come to the Planned Parenthood integration circles with their children. I think it's really beautiful to be able to include children in this work, and I might kick myself for this, but I'd like to be the one to volunteer, you know, our organization, Planned Parenthood, to develop some of that programming on education where parents and children can come together to have, you know, harm reduction informed, fact-based, not fear-based educational programming at these sorts of conferences and events. So, no, did I just overcommit and under-deliver? Right. And in terms of including children in ceremony space, I just want to name also that can be with or without the ingestion of a substance. I mean, the ceremony space itself is an incredible opportunity for children to have an exposure to that type of environment. So I just want to name that doesn't always have to be, you know, with a substance ingested.
Beautiful, and I just want to put in my own little pitch for teenagers as someone who has supported a young woman through those years. I noticed that there is this abrupt sort of being thrust into adulthood without a lot of support for many of our teenagers, and so I would love to see teenagers at these conferences. Yes. Okay. Had to get my little 2 cents in there. So many of us have had experiences with indigenous communities or in indigenous contexts, and I would say not only indigenous contexts. I would include, for myself, my husband is Coptic, you know, Egyptian. I think he's upstairs right now, but you know, in the Coptic communities, children are running around in services, and they're present with their parents, and they're included. So there are many cultural contexts that include children in ways that we don't see here. So how can we appropriate some of those ways of being in a respectful way, and what would we want to learn from? And maybe again, we don't have anyone from an indigenous community represented on our panel, but we can speak from our hearts with humility about this question, I think.
Okay. Well, I think that when you were a child, you probably heard a question, what do you want to be when you grow up? One of the most ridiculous questions that can be asked. And as well as objectifying children, because it's a what question, not a who question. This question forgets that children are not a project in the making. Children are integral, complete beings who need to be valued for who they already are. And indigenous peoples in general, because I also want to acknowledge the amazing diversity of indigenous wisdom and peoples, they know this very well. Indigenous children are not only apprentices, but also teachers. They're part of the community. And I think that an important layer of the cultural appropriation dilemma lies in taking powerful symbols out of the context and emptying them of meaning. So the Western world obsession with turning everything into commodities, and money is interested in taking feathers, necklaces, plant medicines, everything else that can potentially be sold. So one way to learn from indigenous traditions that I feel in my heart is to understand that indigenous ancestry cannot be turned into commodities. And what ancestral cultures, they are ways of life, ways of building relationships. So there is, you probably know that, an African saying that says, it takes a village to raise a child. So let's take a look on how indigenous peoples deal with children in their territories. Understand that children are not property. Raising children is not an individual act or the responsibility of women alone. So let's learn from indigenous tradition. Instead of building a child-free community, maybe it's time to build a community where children are free.
Beautiful. So any brief comments on this before we move into our open question time? We want to make sure we have time for questions.
I feel that was good. Yeah, that was
Okay, beautiful. All right, does anyone want to come forward with a question?
Hi, my name is Cameo. I'm an LCSW, and I'm also a parent of two very small children, one age 4 and one 10 months. And my question is, maybe if you guys could imagine, just briefly, what kind of curriculum would you have in mind by adolescent milestone? I can imagine the way that I approach this is about deconstructing the punitive and harmful notions that substances are inherently bad, as well as demystifying what mystical healing can look like. But, 10 months, 4 years, 10 years, 14, 17, do you guys have any thoughts on that?
You mind if I? Yeah. Thank you for that question. I've thought a lot about this topic of what would be included in the curriculum in this, like, learning or unlearning, maybe. So one of the things that I want to say about education around psychedelic substances is that we cannot have that conversation without acknowledging the impact of the war on drugs. Those two conversations must go hand in hand. Otherwise, it's not a complete conversation. And then I think that there's many sort of tracks that we could do that for children of different ages. So for example, with the very youngest children, we can be thinking about our language around talking about, do we call it a drug, do we call it a medicine, do we call it a substance? How do we explain that to our children? One of the things that I've thought about is sort of, explaining to my own children and trying not to sort of explain within the lens of psychedelic exceptionalism that, there are people who use all manner of substances to help them with different kinds of pain. And, the person who you see who is unhoused, who is, really in very bad shape, is just medicating a different kind of pain than others of us who have a different degree of privilege. Another thing that I've thought about for older children, as I was sort of mentioning this before, is a recognition and a respect. I think you were talking a lot about respect for young people. If we respect first of all, children, young adults taking psychedelics, it's not new. It's been happening. I think that the vast majority of this room took psychedelics when they were a young person, younger than age 18, perhaps. And so if we sort of acknowledge with respect their capacity to do that with the right tools and education around what creates a safe environment, who are the people around you, how do you create a respectful container to do that sort of work? I think if we equip young people to do that, there's no reason that we should think that they can't. They already have been, sometimes in very responsible ways.
Yeah, I mean, I love all of what you said there. I would just add, making sure that there's a dialogue with young people. And I'd apply this point to conferences and all kind of psychedelic settings. We have a lot of emphasis in indigenous traditions on elders, which is wonderful. And certainly including adolescents here could create some respect for elders and tradition. But also, we need to respond as a community to the needs of the younger generation and listen to what those needs are, So just making sure that there was really an open dialogue in any kind of psychedelic setting, be it in the education system, be it in conferences, etc. So that we also develop as a community in line with the younger generation's needs.
Hi, I want to thank you all for leaving your children at home to come here, how committed you are to this dialogue. I have a 4-year-old, I miss her too, and to all the parents too who left the children at home. My question may be kind of controversial. At what age would you consider having them not just participating, like being present in a ceremonial space, but also to eat or drink medicine? And I asked that question being a mom who actually, she's my daughter since a baby, she was present, and very recently she came and ate medicine with us in Mexico. And there was a whole village of people supporting us, and the integration was beautiful. I could see, she only had a little bit, but I could see the family really healing as a system. But I also don't know what I'm doing. I don't have the village that when we went there that was existing. How do we do it responsibly? What kind of containers that we as parents, if we go in there, whether they're ingesting or not, I heard someone say, oh, the energy is so strong, maybe an entity goes into the baby and we have to do cleansing. So I heard a lot of fears around it too, of how they can't handle it or energies come in because they're children. So what are the concerns so that us as a community who are open to it can do it right, so that others who see us doing it realize that this is an important aspect of the experience? Thank you.
Wow, this is a very important question, and I think it depends on the context. I think it's a big challenge to think about young people taking psychedelics, but I think that we should avoid, this is very important, we need good science, we need indigenous traditions to lead us, to teach us, but we don't need moral arguments so let's protect the children. Children are under development. But it's not about being against drugs. We are giving a lot of drugs to young people, to children. So it's about being cosmophobic. This is a very good expression from a Brazilian philosopher. So I think the big challenge, because, for example, I live in a psychedelic community. The first thing that my children, they had after their mother breastfeeding them was a single drop of ayahuasca. So what age? In my case was a few hours. And So I think it's a deeper discussion, a very deep conversation. And I think it's also a big challenge in order to also be creative. We need to ask more questions. We need to talk about it, because it's not only about giving young people psychedelics or, okay, let's put all the young people into psychedelic conferences and everything. No, one single and very simple question. For example, if we would like to invite children to this space, it's not only about inviting children, it's about reinventing the space, reinventing ourselves here. So I think this is the most important question. How can we reinvent ourselves in order to create psychedelic families that are safe for everyone, including also the parents who suffers from prejudice and social stigma?
I would love to just layer on one thing to what you're saying that helps me think about this, Glauber. So in the Jewish tradition, when a baby is circumcised, the practitioner, after they perform the circumcision, they take a piece of gauze, they dip it in alcohol, and they put it in the baby's mouth. It's a tiny drop of alcohol. So when we're thinking about young people in ingestion, we want to think about the age-appropriate dose. There is an age-appropriate dose for, many medicines, and so different cultures have different frameworks for understanding this. Some cultures call it the age of understanding, when a child will be able to articulate that experience. But I just want to kind of name it as actually not extraordinary, not as unusual as we might conceptualize it initially when we think about young people taking these substances.
I don't have anything to add to that, really.
I think we might have...
I'll just add one quick comment, that young people probably know more than you think, and so talking to them sooner and opening this, including them sooner, is just so important as they're moving into adolescence. I just have to throw that. And it's really, there's so much risk and lack of adult mentoring and support, and so I just encourage everyone to be a good auntie and uncle to all of the children in your life.
I think we have time for one quick question. So just a couple minutes of answer.
Thank you. Thank you for talking about that. That was actually the second part of my question, all about rites of passage for children. But a question about pregnancy.
Can you bring the mic a little closer?
Question about pregnancy. Thank you. I've tried asking this to a medical doctor, and I got a very non-response. So I'd love to know about microdosing and pregnancy, because I'm thinking about in terms of mental health. We know that there's a lot of risks to the unborn child associated with the stress of the mom, but also side effects of taking pharmaceuticals and SSRIs. So if you have any thoughts on microdosing, psilocybin in particular, or anything else to support your mental health as you go through pregnancy, I'd love to hear about that.
Well, when I drank ayahuasca, as was traditional with the people I worked with, it was only in very small amounts and was certainly helpful. And it was only 3 times during the pregnancy. I was speaking to somebody about this yesterday, actually, who knew a lot more about mushrooms and microdosing. I'm no authority on that, but their recommendation was really that it's not necessary unless, as you say, it's to help the mother's mental health if they're struggling. And they recommended doing it just in a similar way, I suppose, as I drank ayahuasca, not regularly, not an everyday thing, but with gaps in between could potentially be beneficial. But of course, I don't think it's something we have any research on. So yeah.
If I can just add a little bit to that. When I wrote about this topic, an article about the topic that you're asking about for psychedelics and pregnancy, one of the biggest learnings for me was that you're not going to get an answer. You're not going to Google an answer. You're not going to go to a doctor and get an answer to that question. So really the framework that we might need to adopt is one that comes from the psychedelic community of listening into our own wisdom about this. And some of our own wisdom comes from intuition, it comes from the communities that are around us, and perhaps like drawing from certain lineages that do have these practices, but there's not exactly a lineage around microdosing psilocybin. And so we might need to frame the question as, how do we think about the sort of cost-benefit analysis, if you will, of the health of the mother, including the health of the birthing parent, I apologize, including their mental health. And so if that means that a tiny amount of a substance is going to, be part of a plethora of tools that they use to help them, get through the kind of psycho-spiritual component of their pregnancy, then perhaps that's the answer. But we unfortunately, we probably will never have an answer to that.
Let me just add one comment, final comment, because Jamie said something really important, and I remember that thinking about how to include young people into psychedelic renaissance is also a very important strategy on harm reduction.
All right. Thank you all so much. Everyone give it up for our panel.